CPI for April 2022 was 156.5 relative to 126.6 recorded for the same time in April 2021. The computation of rate of inflation based on these indices, that is 156.5 for the month of April 2022 and 126.6 for the month of April 2021, leads to a year-on-year rate of inflation of 23.6. This literally means that prices of goods and services have gone up by 23.6% over a one-year period, specifically between April 2021 and April 2022. Relative to March 2022, this indicates a 4.2 percentage point inflation rate, higher than the rate that was recorded in March 2022, which stood at 19.4%. This culminates in a first quarter inflation rate of 16.3, which is about 6.2 percentage point what was recorded for the same time in the first quarter of 2021. On a month-on-month basis, that is between March 2022 and April 2022, rate of inflation was 5.1%. And again, this indicates a variation from 4.0 that was recorded on a month-on-month basis for March 2022 relative to April 2022, 5.1%. This is indicating a 1.1 percentage difference. This literally means that on a month-on-month basis, that is between March and April 2022, prices of goods and services have gone up by 5.1%. We do disaggregations at the higher level, specifically the food and non-food inflation, and also from a locally produced items and an imported item perspective. We see that we've sustained the variation between food and non-food inflation for both March and April 2022, which stood at about 5.3%. Specifically, food inflation for April 2022 was 26.6% relative to non-food inflation, 21.3%.
And so that was the Ghana Statistical Service there delivering the details. Some economists have called this shocking. And here is why. Like you heard, the chief statistician say, 26.6% on food impacting or creating an overall inflationary rate of 23.6%. But here's where it gets interesting. This is the highest we've seen in 18 years, and it is becoming very problematic. When you look at diesel alone went up by 90.9% in that last window. So where do we go from here? That is the narrative we're looking at. If you look at the basket of items, March to April, 295 out of 307 of them increased in price. So where do we go from here? We'll be joining our guests on this discussion. Professor Lord Mensah is with the University of Ghana Business School. We also have Professor Gachi, who is with the University of Cape Coast Business School. Both of them joining us for this discussion. I see you, Prof. Professor Gachi. A very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure having you. I would start the conversation from the standpoint of what you make of this recent increase. Like I said, and you know better than I do, 18 years, we've never seen such a rate. We've moved from 19.4% to an overall inflationary rate of 23.6%. Your quick reaction?
Well, I think we all know that certain events took place not quite long, and we expected that those events will have a pass-through effect for us to see upward development in inflation. But I'm not sure that we are expecting such a margin of increase from 19.4% to 23.6%. So as for the increase, it was expected, but the margin of increase was so surprising to notice when the Statistical Service presented the data, I think yesterday. There is another development that have been presented, and that has to do with imported inflation and local inflation. You realize that they are also almost at par, which means that policy measures within the country are not favorable to contain inflation for those locally produced items. That is another area I believe we need to look at critically.
Okay. Now, let me just run this by you. How you say you were expecting an increase, but not an increase of this nature. It's interesting because some foreign economists have looked at this and, in fact, just cite Standard Chartered Bank's Razia Khan, who is chief economist for Africa. That reference is made to this spike being shocking, and that it may pressure the central bank to further tighten interest rates. Do you agree with this categorization of the recent spike being shocking? And do you suspect that this, in fact, may happen, that the central bank would have to work on tightening interest rates?
If you look at the orientation of the central bank over the years, especially focusing on inflation targeting,
right,
it is very clear that would trigger upward development in the policy rates, not merely because of the increase from 19.4% to 23.6%, but also for the fact that there are new development taking place within the country that has not yet reflected in terms of the pass-through effect for the coming months. Those will also reflect in the inflation for May, for example, for June, and for July. So the trajectory going forward is also showing upward development, and the inflation rate as of now is also higher than what it was before the last policy rate announcement. And again, other indicators like the cost of exchange of the Ghana cedi to the dollar is not coming down. Other development in the fiscal side, interest rate has gone up, and that is lending rate across board has gone up. The last time that the policy rate was captured, we were talking about 14.4% Treasury bill rate. I believe now Treasury bill rate is around the region of 16.74 or so. So all these things are indicators that with this increase in the level of inflation, policy rates should reflect this development upward.
Now, so that is clear, but we look at our projections, and I want to find out what we are not getting right. Our administration projected an inflationary rate between 6 to 10%. We've hit 19.4%, and now we've added some, 4.2% to hit 23.6%. What are we not getting right? What is it that we're not doing that is leading to this gargantuan, rise in inflation? Because mind you, as I mentioned right before you came on, in the basket of 307 items, 295 of them have their prices shooting up. That is a concern, isn't it?
Yes. I think that is the point I raised earlier on. So if you decompose or you disaggregate local products from the imported ones, all of them are seeing upward development in their prices. And that should tell us that we need to watch our policies, the way they are implemented, retreat and revise them to respond to the needs of the economy. Now, if you look at transport fare, look at diesel as you talked about earlier, and other items which are very sensitive to transport fares and general economic activity, you will not be surprised that the energy sector is so sensitive to many activities within the economy, and those items captured in the basket are influenced by many of these developments in this sector alone. So that tells you that much attention should be paid to the energy sector and do what we're supposed to do. Unfortunately, the government is looking at revenue as against making this as a convenient input that will control economic activity. So until government begins to moderate its revenue orientation regarding the energy sector, we may continue to have the influence of the energy sector on price development in the country.
And in the interim, if I were to ask you of a short-term measure that we can use to mitigate the situation, what would you say?
Well,
Because
I
I
think
know that generally, in dealing with these matters, you would want to look at short, medium to long term, and the long term, of course, to ensure that you have some stability in that sense. But in the short term, people are saying that they are buying one tomato for 2 cedis. That is a great concern because food security is also important. So in the short term, if you were a finance minister, what would you do?
unfortunately, I am not.
But if you were.
But I think I've indicated that the energy sector is so sensitive and is influencing a lot of prices in the country. Government have been advised to look at the taxes as one of the ways to moderating prices of fuel, and that will also moderate lorry fares because you need transport to bring the goods from wherever they are produced for the distribution purposes. So to ensure that we have a cost-effective supply chain for these items across the country. So I believe it is time for government to rethink about the taxes within the energy sector in the interest of price build-up in the country. I believe that is the low-hanging fruit that the government can fall on now. As it is, the data is also showing that most of our agricultural produce that we have in the country are hugely affected by inflation. Price development for imported goods and locally produced goods are not different. So we will need to go back to our agricultural policies and see how we can target those crops to be produced cost effectively.
Current inflationary rates in some countries as of last year, comparing them to this year, and it makes for painful reading, especially when you come to the African belt. But when it comes to Ghana, it appears, like we've said, in 18 years, this is the highest we have seen. So as it is now, looking at all the issues we are looking at, we are also still grappling with what is happening between Russia and Ukraine, still grappling with COVID-19, still grappling with funds that ordinarily would have come to us that are not coming to us, that we could have used to shore up our economy, because every other country is also battling with the same issues we're dealing with. Where does that basically leave us? Will this inflationary rate just keep going up? Is that where we are? Is that what we can expect?
Well, I think it is not merely about external flow of effects, but our own policy measures that we have taken recently are having counterproductive effects. For example, we have increased the policy rate to 17%, and we know that will drive up Treasury bill rate. It will drive up the bonds that we are issuing, and largely it will increase the lending rates in the country. That is a cost in itself, and that will have a pass-through effect in the cost structure of businesses and those who retail. So that is one. Then in the face of this, we have also limited the liquidity of the commercial banks in lending to businesses, the private sector in particular, by ensuring that when the commercial banks raise deposit, all the deposit is not available for them for financial intermediation. That is another counterproductive situation we have found ourselves in. So until we begin to revise some of these measures, the issue will linger on, and the economy of Ghana will be hurting. And also remember, we are talking about CPI, Consumer Price Index. This goes to the heart of cost of living to the average person. If okra is suffering from inflation of that nature, if mango, if watermelon, all these things are suffering from huge price hike, plantain and the rest, then you can imagine the burden that we are putting on the average household in the country. So the earlier we revise some of the policy, the better it will be for us.
And just to break it down for those of you watching us, we're in the top tier when it comes to inflationary rates in Africa. If you look at, we're in the top 5. And let me just break it down for you. According to some statistics that we have here, even South Sudan is looking at, something around minus 8.52. But you go to Benin with 2, Seychelles with 2.2, Cameroon with 2.37. You come down to Tanzania with 3.8 in terms of the inflationary rate. The Ivory Coast, neighboring Ivory Coast with 4.5, Mali with 4.5, Namibia with 4.5. Let's look at some other countries. South Africa at 5.9, Kenya at 6.47, Togo, neighboring Togo at 8.7. We have Rwanda at 10.5. And then, we have Egypt with 13.1. And then you come into our league. Burkina Faso at 15.1%, Nigeria at 15.92%, Sierra Leone 17.59%. And then you hit Ghana, which is the 5th highest, at least per this league log when it comes to inflation, at 23.6%, which is what we are dissecting this morning. Then Angola, 4th, 27%. Ethiopia at 36.6%. Zimbabwe, of course, we know the Zimbabwean situation, 96.4%. And Sudan at 260. We're at 23.6%, and we're feeling the pinch like this. Others are at 260. That is Sudan. I don't know what it would be like to be in their shoes, but especially focusing on food prices, because it appears over the last few windows, food prices have shot up the inflationary rate. In that particular respect, what would you like to see, Professor Gachi, being done to grant us some security, if you like?
Well, I think I've indicated that already, that our agricultural policy ought to be looked at, how our agricultural policy is able to deal with food security, cost-effective production of our crops, and also low prices for our agricultural produce. That is what will sustain the average Ghanaian. So it should be of concern to us to revisit our agricultural policy. I say this because the Fiscal Service has done...
Pardon the interjection. Which specific aspects of our agricultural policy? I need you to share that with us.
That is why I'm coming to.
Right.
The Fiscal Service has disaggregated the data and was able to point out the crops that are locally produced. They are not imported, but their price development is at par with the imported one. That is the indication that the Fiscal Service has given to us. And those are the things that we need to focus on to see what we could do to ensure that production is cost effective, pricing is within the limit that is acceptable for a good standard of living. So I believe that that data is an input for decision making by those in the agricultural ministry and the government at large.
Do hold for me, Professor Gachi. Let me also bring in Professor Lord Mensah of the University of Ghana Business School. Professor Mensah, very good morning to you. Thank you for joining the conversation. You would have to unmute for us, please. All right. So we'll try to get Professor Mensah.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, I can hear you now, loud and clear. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, good morning, and good morning to our viewers.
Great. Let's just kickstart with the latest inflationary rate, 23.6%, highest in 18 years, 295 out of 307 items in the basket affected. What is your quick reflection on this? We've heard some foreign economists refer to this as shocking. Were you shocked?
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all. I'm not surprised because, we talked about inflation. We talked about inflation, and we think it's as a result of, excess money in people's pocket. Therefore, they go out there and they are ready to buy anything at any price. Even if the price is up, they are prepared to buy it because they have money. Purely, we look at inflation as liquidity, issue, and for which the Monetary Policy Committee have been using the policy rate to target this liquidity. But for me, it goes beyond that. I think, the policy rate target for me is overemphasized because the typical Ghanaian inflation, I don't see it to be an inflation that signifies funds in people's pocket, and therefore they are prepared to buy anything at any price at all. So even if ice water is 1 cedi, they are prepared to buy it at 2 cedi. No, it has our inflation.
Hello, Doc. All right, we'll have to work on that connection to get Prof back on the line, but he was making some very important points. Professor Gachi, so right before we bring Prof back, he is saying as well that he was not surprised, that this had happened, just like you had also shared your bits in there. But I'd just like to find out from you, is it any surprise at all, or was this to be expected? Because I do know that our economy, at least when it comes to real GDP growth, we're making quite an impact until weakened oil prices, gold prices, and other things hit, the pandemic and all. But now oil prices are back up. Are we seeing the benefit of that as far as our inflationary rate is concerned? Prof, you'd have to unmute for us, please.
I am not muted.
Okay, all right, I can hear you now.
Yeah. You see, when you look at oil, we need to look at the net effects. Yes, when oil prices are going up beyond what we budgeted for, we have a windfall in terms of revenue. But we are also importing so much of refined product into the country. And it is the refined product that has direct effect on economic management on daily basis, because the prices are translated into transfer fares, they are translated into the cost structure of businesses, and they are translated into pricing of their goods and services. So that is where we need to pay attention. If the crude oil price internationally is favorable, but we don't have some control over refining of our products, and we need to bring 80%, 100% of refined product from outside the country, we may not see that effect on inflation.
So looking then, since we're talking about fuel products, looking then about the jump in diesel, 90.9% within this short space. And I bring it up because of the impact it would be having. Farmers, their equipment, in industry, their equipment. Even we can rope in the transport unions. I was interacting with the Concerned Drivers Association recently. A lot of the buses they use are diesel. So what then would be the real impact of diesel specifically, or fuel, on our economy and impact, inflation as well?
I think that is the reason why when you look at the data provided by the Statistical Survey, they also provide the weights. So you will see that what you are talking about, the diesel, the weight is higher, and it is more sensitive to price development across board in the country. And that is why I indicated earlier on that we need to again look at our energy sector pricing and taxes within that sector, because it is very sensitive to price development across all sectors.
Let's also look at one of the components, cereal. And it's interesting because with the Russo-Ukrainian war, we've seen even more of a problem with that. The wheat especially, sunflower oil and all of that. Of course, not a cereal, but especially when it comes to wheat, we are seeing part of the impact more so in other African countries than Ghana. But when it comes to that especially, we see the percentage shooting up here as well. And this also is going to have a spiral effect. But I bring that in to look at how we should be cushioning ourselves as a country, because it appears each time it is a reaction. We don't seem to have mechanisms in place. So when it comes to those components that we are often importing, like cereals, a lot of it, what should we do to ensure that the inflationary rate, is something we can deal with?
Unfortunately, the data provided by the Fiscal service classify wheat as locally produced cereal. So that will not sit well with what other countries are experiencing. But what it is that we need to pay much more attention to those who are engaged in the cultivation of wheat and all other cereals that we have identified. That is what we should be doing. There should be proper targeting. Here in Ghana, the Americans are giving subsidies to some section of their farmers. The Europeans are doing that. But even for us, if we are supposed to provide fertilizer, we are selling to them at half price. So we need to consider all these things and repackage a policy that will target the cereals that we believe that we are consuming. The weight of consumption is very high, and then it's likely to influence price development in the country. That is what agriculture policy should be doing. Agriculture policy is needed in managing interest exchange rate one way or the other. It's needed to manage inflation. So where agriculture policy is only about talking about planting for food and jobs, and they give figures, we don't know whether the figures are correct or not. That is not the way agriculture policy is to be managed. Agriculture policy should be sensitive to other major indicators of the economy. And that is what should be our focus.
Prof, hold for me. Let me bring in Professor Lord Mensah back into the conversation. Professor Mensah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
All right, please go ahead. You were making a point about not being shocked about the latest trend.
Yes, because we've been placing too much emphasis on monetary policy as a target, for inflation. I was thinking, okay, fine. Let's look at the fiscal policy side and how we spend. I have always been making, this analysis, saying that, look, if we spend very well and spend into areas that will reduce our import, it should go a long way to control our inflation. So our inflation in Ghana is not about liquidity. It's an inflation that is important. So when freight cost goes up, we are likely to build up inflation in our environment. When prices of goods and services goes up elsewhere, where we import from, it's likely to build up into inflation in our environment. And then also the way and manner we target our policies. So I see what is happening now, this surprise jump in inflation as a result of failure in our monetary policy and then failure in our fiscal policy as well. The fiscal policy has to do with the way we spend. When you look at the disaggregation of the inflation, clearly you will see that transport inflation is one of the highest.
Right.
Again, food inflation is one of the highest. Now let's look at transport inflation. If you take transport inflation, what is causing transport or fare prices to go up is one, spare parts and then fuel prices. We cannot control fuel prices because we are net importer of fuel. Now let's look at the other side, which is the spare parts. If you look at our roads that we do every now and then, this government, for instance, has spent a lot of money on asphalt overlay. We have asphalt already, and we are overlaying them, building up the thickness to maybe to within a certain residential areas, whilst other areas don't have it. And we should understand that the more your roads are not good, the more cars will demand spare parts, and therefore you must import, spare parts. And as a result of that, build up into exchange rate, and then therefore has something to do with inflation. I mean, we cannot do the analysis technically so much for the hearing of our good people of the country. So effectively, I can say that the way we spend. Now let's look at agriculture. Agriculture, if you take, for instance, the produce that are coming out from the policies that were being rolled out. The Agri Ministry, of course, over the past 5 years, every year has had its budget increase, for the past years, because it has been a policy-focused ministry for which government wants to channel planting for food and jobs policy to ensure that there are jobs and there are food. If there's food, why would inflation, a driver be only food inflation? Those are the questions I ask myself every now and then. So effectively, our policies are not working. The fiscal policies are not working. The expenditure side of our policies are not working very well. Because if you go to the market today and then you buy kinky of the same size that you were buying last year, 2 cedi, now you're buying it 3 cedi. That's about 50% increase in inflation. And these are basics that you need in life every now and then. If you were buying gas of about 90 Ghana last year, and now you're buying it around, 200 Ghana, that's more than 100% increase. So even the number that is coming out, the wages, I'm surprised is around 20, because I tell myself every now and then, relying on the basics that I consume every day, inflation is more than that 23% that is being paraded out there.
You think it's even worse than the 23.6%?
Oh, yes. I'm not surprised it's not around even 60%. Because the realities on the ground reflect different. The realities on the grounds reflect different. Because if you look at the daily consumptions, their price increase goes beyond the 20% that is being paraded. So effectively, we need to look at our policies very well. I think for the food, if for nothing at all, we should be able to have maize on the market to the extent that, because we've rolled out this policy, planting for food and jobs, for the past 5 years. And when you grow maize, within 6 months, you should harvest maize. If we have to go by the numbers, you should have realized about this, I would have, harvested about almost 12 times, maize, and then our warehouses that has been built as a result of waiting for this planting for food would have been full now as we speak.
Prof,
so now that there's a shortage.
So just quickly, I don't want to lose my train of thought on this. 2 quick issues. So we don't really have a large silo or storage system when it comes to all of these products. That is why we have gluts and all of that. But would you say then that on the back of that, in that specific regard, planting for food and jobs has not lived up to expectation? If we are here where we are, is it failing then?
It hasn't. If it has, then the war that is in Ukraine shouldn't have had impact directly on us as a result of telling us that because of what we call the war in Ukraine, we are not getting enough wheat. And of course, I know not most Ghanaians, consume wheat. But then in the end, if we are...
But we end up using it for bread and other things. Flour, bread.
Yeah, of course. But then let's understand that if you're rolling out policy and you want the policy to have impact, you go into your portfolio of food imports and then look at which ones that you can grow in your environment in such a way that you minimize the importation. And when you minimize the importation, you make more of it available on your market, you control inflation, and your exchange rate is also controlled. So effectively, the policy that we are rolling out, which is planting for food and jobs, are not living up to expectation, as you indicated.
All right. Let me quickly. So did I hear you say that from where you sit, what do you see when you go out there to make purchases? Our current inflation, if you are looking at it as an economist, should be hovering around 60%.
From my daily consumptions, right? My daily consumptions, I see it beyond the 23.6 that is being churned out now. Because if I was buying gas, right, last year, and the gas was 90 Ghana, and now I'm buying it 200, I see it to be more than 100% of increase. If I was buying a loaf of bread, 12 cedi, right, and now I'm buying it 20 Ghana, that's about 66% increase. If I was buying a kenke of similar size around 2 cedi and now it's 3 cedi, that is more than 50% increase. So for me, on the average, if you look at the wages and on our daily consumptions, if you tell me price of my shirt has gone up by 50%, how many times do I change my shirt? How many times do I go to the market to buy shirt? But then on daily basis, I must consume, I must buy food, I must buy gas, and ensure that my family upkeep is on point. So effectively, I'm telling you that my daily consumption, that inflation target, the inflation that has been brought out, is too small. It has to go up a bit because the numbers that are coming out, and then from our daily expenditure, I can tell you that we're spending more than the 23% as price increase.
Now let's look at the transport cost differences, the differentials in there. We know that diesel has increased month on month by 90.9%. We know that when it comes to the transport costs, we are now looking at about 33.5%, and that is an increase from 17.4%, almost double what we saw in March, between March and April. I put that into the context of a 20% transport fare increment that we have seen in recent times. And we also know there is that convention that when the inflationary rate goes up by about 10%, now we've added another 4.2%, almost 5%, they would also increase. Where do you see the trajectory? Where do you see that going? Because there was 15% in March in terms of transport fare increases. In May, we've seen 20%. And on the back of this, it can only mean it will go further.
Yeah, for the transport, I can tell you that until we control, the fuel prices, right, which we don't have control on part of it. The only part that we can control is the taxes that government plays or the levies that government plays on these fuel prices, which if government is to scrap some of them, it should cushion transport owners against importation of spare parts and all those. Then by then we can have that kind of stability in fares. But then government also needs money. Government is desperate for money. So government cannot reduce or take off some of these levies as it is expected. So if you ask me of the trajectory, it's going to go up, here and there every now and then. Because once fuel price goes up, the transport owner is thinking about, okay, fine, how am I going to buy this fuel to commute within the next 5 kilometers as I used to do to make my sales? And then we should also understand that these transport owners also took loans from the banks to purchase these vehicles to be on the road, and they must pay back. Now, if you look at the system effectively, it tells you that, okay, fine, if government should direct its expenditure very well, construct very good roads to ensure that spare parts, purchases goes down, then on that side, it's more or less like an absorption for the private man to have that kind of comfort to drive on the road at a reduced, purchases of, spare parts. Then it can build up into the price reduction. Until we look at it in the long term, there's no way we can control that kind of fair price. Every now and then, it's going to catch up with us when fuel price goes up on the international market.
Do hold for me, Professor Mensah. Let me bring back Professor Gachi, who has also patiently been with us. Prof, so in the midst of all of this, when you look at the planned or projected tariff increments when it comes to utility prices, and you put that side by side with the e-levy and other taxes on petroleum that we're having to grapple with, Where does what picture does it paint when it comes to the ordinary Ghanaian and his or her pocket?
Well, all those things that you talk about have a direct effect on the disposable income of the average Ghanaian, and what we will be seeing, or we have started seeing, is that there is huge erosion of disposable income, the increase in the cost of living for the average Ghanaian that you're talking about. Of course, we need more revenue to do a lot for the country, but those revenue measures should be fashioned in such a way that they follow some acceptable principle and they are not too burdensome for the average person. But as we speak, the two items that you mentioned, e-levy already is a burdensome tax, which is not acceptable by the majority of Ghanaians, but have been imposed through the lawmaking process. That will continue to have its pass-through effect in the economy. The same thing applies to fuel prices, as we have all indicated from the beginning of the discussion. Fuel prices, in particular, are very sensitive to our economic life. And the more they go up, the greater strength they have to erode our disposable income and increase the cost of living for all of us.
Prof, so I was speaking to you initially about whether you suspected the central bank would tighten interest rates. We know the lending rate has gone up by a record 250 basis points. Where does this leave us? What will the central bank likely inch toward, and what would be the likely impact? Because this inflationary rate must be dealt with. How? That's the question.
Well, the central bank is working with some metrics, and we all know that when inflation goes up by a certain level, and then the fiscal side demonstrates a certain pattern, you need to take a particular decision. So it will be strange for the central bank not to follow the pattern. It is very clear. Remember the inflation rate.
Which is what? What is the pattern?
The pattern is that inflation has gone up significantly. The fiscal side is distorted, and there is huge risk to the economy. Those things should reflect in upward development in policy rates. But the point I was going to make is that the the inflation rate we're talking about is April inflation rate. That is past. There are developments that are going on telling us that inflation will continue to go up. When water tariff is approved, when the electricity tariff is approved, it will have a sensitive pass-through effect, and that will also put inflation on upward path, and that will have to be captured by the monetary authorities to reflect in upward monetary policy rate. And then the distortion will continue. The lending rate will have to go up. I believe my colleague was talking about the overly reliance on targeting liquidity. So the banks have been targeted by increasing the cash reserve by another 3%. What it means is that when they deposit money, 12% of that deposit will not be available for them to engage in lending, etc. So you see that effect on the under subscription for our treasury bill, under subscription for the bonds being issued in recent time by the government. It's not helping anybody. It is bringing much more problem for the economic takeoff for the country.
So then, to wrap the conversation with both of you, we'll try to get back Professor Lord Mensah. His connection seems to have a bit of a challenge. But the policymakers, those who matter in this space, they are watching us right now. They watch us every day. And you have the opportunity, Professor Gachi, if you could give them counsel as an economist, what would you tell them? I know you've enumerated a number of matters, but to wrap the conversation, what are the pointers you would give them to look at to cushion the ordinary Ghanaian as of now? Maybe a few points.
It's very simple. Policymakers should engage in coordination.
Coordination.
Exactly. The central bank should know its limit in terms of managing exchange rates. The rest will come from agriculture and other sectors. That coordination is needed to have a robust policy front that will deal with some of these issues in a comprehensive and holistic manner. The idea that the central bank has all that it takes to manage exchange rate is a fallacy. It is not true. There are issues relating to exchange rate management that the central bank does not have control over. The same thing applies to inflation and other development in the country. So policy coordination and engagement is the way forward.
Policy engagement and formulation, the way forward. Prof, we're grateful that you could take the time to join us this morning, and we wish you the very best of the day, sir.
Thank you.
All right. That was Professor John Gachi, who is with the University of Cape Coast Business School, joining us for this discussion. In case you haven't heard, and I'll just see whether we can get Professor Lord Mensah back on the line for his wrap-up thoughts. But where we stand currently, 23.6% by way of inflation on the back of 19.4% in the previous month. So when you look at April, 23.6%, and we're in May. So whatever constraints we're seeing in May, as Professor Gachi has pointed out, we could even see another upsurge or uptick in the inflationary rate. And it is even more disturbing when you look at fuel commodities, because diesel is up by 90.9%, almost 91%. And the figures we're seeing now, government projected between 6 to 10%. The 23.6% we're seeing now is the highest we've seen in almost 2 decades. So giving us some cause for worry. Food prices alone up by 26.6%. And you also look at transport cost, which also includes fuel prices, going up from 17.4% in March to 33.5% currently. So what is going to be the way forward? Only time and maybe the economic management team will tell. Will we see food prices coming down so that things can stabilize better? Because food prices coupled with transport costs have led to the recent surge we have seen. Well, we do not have Professor Lord Mensah. He's unable to join us further, but we're grateful to you, Prof, if you get to watch for your time. We take a bit of a break here and we return with more talk about more pertinent matters. We know that the PURC has been engaging stakeholders when it comes to utility tariffs. More on that after the break.